Hey everyone, welcome to Plants and Politics. So there's something I've been wanting to talk about, and I really needed to put together all of the data. The Guardian recently reported on this, but also The Intercept had put out some information in the past couple months about how white supremacist groups have been successfully infiltrating United States law enforcement agencies over the past 20 years. A lot of this information comes from former FBI special agent Michael German. He has been investigating why police fail to address far-right domestic terrorist threats from vigilante and militia groups. And he also went undercover back in the 1990s and infiltrated far-right extremist groups to get an inside look and figure out exactly how they work. So what he's concluded based on his extensive research is that since the year 2000, many members of US law enforcement were involved with racist militia groups and have actually been tied to racist militant activities in over 12 states, including Alabama, California, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Michigan, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Oregon, Texas, Virginia, Washington, and West Virginia. However, German said that because no official entity is collecting the data on these groups and their ties to law enforcement, it's difficult to really wrap your arms around and determine the size and scope of this issue, how widespread it is. But German also said that internal documents from the FBI and Department of Homeland Security specifically identify white supremacists as the most lethal terrorist threat in the US. And it's noted in those documents that militia groups have, quote, active links to law enforcement. Now, this is nothing new, of course. It's a well-documented part of history and established fact that police officers long ago and not so long ago wore their blue uniforms during the day, but then at night they'd throw on their white uniforms with a pointy hood and go lynch people of color. So they've just gotten better at hiding their true feelings and intentions over the past several decades, but clearly it hasn't gotten a whole lot better because, as we've seen, this plays out with all kinds of issues in our country and in many situations, including recently. I mean, we've witnessed cops showing preferential treatment to right-wing extremists by ignoring their blatant violent behavior towards Black Lives Matter protesters. All the while, they're shooting pepper balls, tear gas, and rubber bullets at peaceful protesters. And in video after video, you see cops standing around while white supremacist lunatics are viciously attacking peaceful protesters. It's happening all over the place. And German's research corroborates this fact. So he told The Guardian, quote, far-right militants are allowed to engage in violence and walk away while protesters are met with violent police actions. This negligent response, he added, empowers violent groups in dangerous and potentially lethal ways. The most violent elements within these far-right militant groups believe that their conduct is sanctioned by the government, and therefore they're much more willing to come out and engage in acts of violence against protesters. Gee, I don't know where they would have gotten that idea. I mean, good people on both sides. And, you know, when someone in Trump's audience mentioned that he should start shooting immigrants, he laughed and made funny faces and made a joke out of it. I don't know where they would get the idea that they should lash out and become violent against protesters. It's a big mystery. And German also spoke with The Intercept news outlet, and he shared the following, quote, to see the police continuing to treat these far-right militants as friendlies is troubling. There are people who have been engaged in protests in Portland for years now. They're well identified. I know them, and I don't live in Portland. Several of them are under court orders not to attend another protest because of the violence they've already perpetrated. And yet, they can engage with the police as if they're auxiliaries. It's really astonishing. People can point guns at people in broad daylight and not be arrested. And we saw this play out last week in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I mean, after Kyle Rittenhouse murdered 2 people and injured a third, not only were cops handing out water to militia members at this event and telling them how much they're appreciated, including Rittenhouse, shortly before he murdered 2 people and injured another, but they also let Rittenhouse just leave. They let him leave the state and go home to sleep in his own bed, even though people were yelling and pointing at him, saying he just shot people. They just walked on by. Meanwhile, if you're a Black person, you're going to either get choked out or you're going to get shot in the back. Now, to top it all off, and I wish I had this video. I saw it on the night of these murders when Rittenhouse shot these 3 people. There was a video circulating on the night of those shootings on Twitter, and it had a member of someone who was allegedly a Boogaloo boy. Again, such a stupid name. And they were telling Black Lives Matter protesters that cops were planning to force the protesters down into an area where they'd basically be cornered and where militia members would be waiting for them. So it's unclear whether this militia member was telling the truth or if he was just trying to incite more violence and hatred towards the police, because even though most Boogaloo members are racist, they also hate the cops. And they're actually trying to use police killings to incite a second civil war, as they put it. And that's not according to me, that's literally according to their own members and what they've told reporters and other people. Or you can see it on 4chan and all these different social media sites where they gather. So these recent incidents are a perfect example. Take a look.
Protests and rallies are an opportunity for extremists to spread their message through violence. U.S. prosecutors say 3 Boogaloo extremists were heading to a protest in downtown Las Vegas on May 30th to do just that.
According to court documents, the 3 men were determined to incite violence, which included a plan to burn police with Molotov cocktails during a Black Lives Matter protest that happened Saturday in downtown Las Vegas. They're accused of being part of an anti-government extremist group known as the Boogaloo movement.
A radical group suspected to be spotted at protests nationwide within the last week could be in Colombia.
Men in Hawaiian shirts showing up at these protests.
Lott believes 24-year-old Joshua Barnard, the man he says is caught on video stealing a police jacket from a patrol car, could be involved.
There's a lot of information that he's part of the Boogaloo organization. It's a very radical group. Their mission is to create a new civil war.
The California Air Force sergeant suspected in the ambush killing of a Santa Cruz deputy is now charged in the shooting death of a federal security officer in Oakland.
Now, they say Stephen Carrillo was a passenger in the white van at the time. They say he used a homemade machine gun in both of these killings and that he appears to sympathize with a group called Boogaloo.
And remember, these are only 2 of many incidences involving right-wing terrorists. The worst cases, of course, involve men who just walked into places of worship or stores like Walmart and just mowed down and murdered men, women, and children. And then, of course, as is so typical, police find all these social media posts or a manifesto full of right-wing extremist talking points. And there's actual evidence now proving that the recent protests have brought these right-wing nut jobs out from under the rocks they were living under for many years. A group called Center for Analysis of the Radical Right has been collecting data for a while now. And since George Floyd's murder and the BLM protests began in late May, they've documented 500 instances of right-wing extremists gathering in response to Black Lives Matter protests, 64 cases of simple assault, 38 vehicle assaults, and 9 cases of shots fired at demonstrators, resulting in 3 deaths. So those are all perpetrated by right-wing extremists. But in the meantime, you have faux news channel and the Republican lunatics pushing, lawmakers and other QAnon conspiracy theorists, continuing to push their anti-BLM propaganda. Then they have this strange dueling narrative about Antifa members are weak soy boys living in mommy's basement. But then, to suit their needs and fit their narrative for that night, then it's switched to, no, there are these all-powerful, deadly left-wing extremists who come to destroy suburbia. I mean, they need to make up their minds because it can't be both. But in any case, they completely ignore the violence and the murders committed by these right-wing extremists, especially if they happen to be a former military member or a police officer or tied to police officers. And again, we're reminded that cops only serve some of the American citizens who pay their salaries and fund their retirement. Also, part of the Intercept reporting was this excerpt, quote, "Days before the killings in Wisconsin, a so-called Back the Blue rally in Gilbert, Arizona, saw armed pro-police demonstrators beating counter-protesters while law enforcement looked on. In the run-up to the confrontation, which are now a weekly event, supporters of the rally posted violent fantasies online and death threats against their critics. Days later, police in Portland stood by as gun-toting men waving thin blue line flags brawled with leftist protesters in the city's streets." So this is just becoming common. So yeah, defund the fucking police is what I say, because we're paying their salaries and they're not doing what they're supposed to do for all of us. They're not protecting all of us. They pick and choose who to protect. Many of them, as these articles show, are right-wing extremists themselves. They hold bigoted views, which explains exactly how and why they treat people of color as if they're subhuman. And me personally, I don't want my tax dollars going to that. But anyway, guys, I thought this was really important information. Of course, we must get bigots out of law enforcement. If you have any type of bigotry in your heart or preconceived notions about people based on their color, their race, their gender, you don't belong in a position of power. You don't belong in a position where you are called upon to take action and make decisions, especially split-second decisions about potentially the life or death of someone you're there and supposedly swore to protect and serve. Because as we've seen, it clearly comes out. Their intentions, the hatred that they have in their heart is on display. We've seen it over and over again. We just saw it again this week. As always, like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to Plants and Politics. The only way we can take our country and power back is to spread the truth and build an army. So remember to like, follow, subscribe, and share on Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks again.